educational, having said what is clinical pearls. The observation on which a pearl is based should be valid. The pearl should be compatible with any existing relevant evidence. If the part of the pearl offers a suggestion for therapy, the proposed modality should be both safe and cost effective. The information should be practical for the intended audience. The information, the pearl should be useful in solving clinical problems, especially everyday problems. So in that cell, if we just put the flow chart, it should be practical, useful in problem solving, safe and cost-effective treatment possibilities, compatible with evidence, and valid observation. This is very important. So I would like to start with bacterial infections, where I just listed some clinical clues for infection in children. The first would be, we know often with impetigo. The dilemma is non-bullous impetigo and bullous impetigo. The non-bullous impetigo, the classical honey-colored crust, is nothing but serous and purulent drainage which forms a characteristic honey-colored crust. In fact, any serum that exudates or extrudes to the surface and dries can appear honey-colored. Whereas bullous impetigo, there will be peripheral peeling at the perimeter of the crust, which is caused by desmoglein 1 cleavage, is very useful or helpful in making the clinical diagnosis. Then we also know there are a lot of sequelae of group A streptococcal infections. There are two important ones. One is glomerulonephritis and rheumatic fever. Sometimes you treat a patient of impetigo or some bacterial infection or secondarily infected scabies, and after 2 weeks or so, the child may come with a swollen face. Yes, it is acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, which is an uncommon but complication of non-bullous impetigo. The pathogenesis appears to be best explained by the abnormal immune response or hypersensitivity to streptococcal antigen. This is very important, simply because I'll tell you what is the reason there, but the PSGN is more common in children than adults, and developing post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis after impetigo is most common in preschool age children. And it takes about 3 weeks after the start of symptoms of group A streptococcal infection for PSGN to develop. And what is important is treatment with antibiotic does not seem to have any effect on the risk of developing post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. This is the clinical part. You may say, I have treated, but still what is the reason why the child has developed? This is the reason actually. And then comes the blistering distal dactylitis, very rare, but we have seen often. And it is an infection caused by group A streptococci as an individual bulla on the distal finger. The clinical clue is linked to, if it is linked to Staphylococcus aureus, especially if multiple bulla are present, usually it presents as single. If you find multiple, then it has to be caused by Staph aureus. Treatment is with incision, drainage, and a course of beta-lactamase resistant antibiotics. So clinical clue is here, if the blistering dactylitis is due to streptococci, there will be single bullae, and if multiple, then it has to be staphylococcal induced, simply because the treatment also varies. Then coming to the clinical clue number 4, whenever you see a cellulitis, you should also suspect when it goes in for necrotizing fasciitis. What are the clues? One is severe pain out of proportion to the skin findings, rapidly spreading edema, bulla formation, mental status changes, and there can be marked leukocytosis or elevated creatinine kinase level. They all suggest necrotizing fasciitis more than cellulitis. And one more thing, anesthesia of the overlying skin may be present or prior to the appearance of the skin necrosis. That is the end stage of the necrotizing fasciitis. Then another clinical clue would be, we always face, especially in children, intertrigo. There will be doubt whether it is candidial or streptococcal intertrigo. The picture which shows there on the left side of my screen, the appearance of satellite lesions surrounding the main eruption favor the candida infection. Hello? Just 1 minute, some problem is there. Okay. The presence of pain and bright red color and a foul odor suggests group A streptococcal intertrigo. And one more important point is, if it is due to streptococcal intertrigo, multiple folds, skin folds will be involved. So that is a difference between the clinical clues between intertrigo due to candidial intertrigo or streptococcal intertrigo. Then comes to another case scenario which we'll look into. We find two children, in fact, they are different presentations here. One child had scar-like lesions only over the external ear, and another child who was on some immunosuppressive agents had multiple scar lesions all over the body. So the questions which arise out of this is, what is the diagnosis? Number one, do you think same diagnosis for both cases? If so, what is the difference? And what is the pathogenesis and how do you approach? Well, here is a clinic.
There is PPT is not moving, sir. It is still in intertrigo PPT.
Oh, sorry. I will okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll redo it. Okay. Share screen. One minute. Sorry for the technical glitch. Now, can you see this picture?
Yes, sir. Now it is, sir.
Okay, we come to a case scenario where you have two different children, one with a lesion over the external ear and another with multiple skin lesions, which look like scar. They are clinically scar all over the body. Well, the question should be, what is the diagnosis? Do you think same diagnosis for both cases? If so, what is the difference? And what is the pathogenesis and how do you approach actually? One minute. Something is wrong with. Okay, the clinical clue here, in fact, the diagnosis is the ecthyma gangrenosum. The clinical clue would be, there are two types, whether it is bacteremic ecthyma gangrenosum or non-bacteremic ecthyma gangrenosum. The one over the ear, external ear, is only the non-bacteremic form of ecthyma gangrenosum. The lesions develop at the location of the direct inoculation into the site. Whereas the bacteremic form of EZ is more common than the non-bacteremic form. With bacteremia, the causative organism is spread hematogeneously. You find multiple lesions because the perivascular invasion ultimately leads to ischemic necrosis of the surrounding skin also. So what is the treatment difference also? The outcome also. The beta-lactam antibiotics with or without an aminoglycoside is an appropriate for treatment for both bacteremic and non-bacteremic EZ. The absence of bacteremia is associated with the best outcome in non-bacteremic where I showed you a child with external ear lesion. And patients with Pseudomonas bacteremia, wherever multiple lesions are there, there will be high mortality up to 38% actually. Raghu, is it moving?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The most striking difference between these two groups of patients was significantly lower mortality rate for the non-bacteremic patients. So out of this case scenario, the clinical pearls are, there is a difference between bacteremic versus non-bacteremic ecthyma gangrenosum, that is number of the lesions. That means single lesions versus the multiple lesions. And always non-bacteremic will have a good response, whereas the bacteremic one will have a poor prognosis. Then come to the another case scenario. All of you know this type of cases which you often see also. There is lesions over the umbilical area, then multiple eroded lesions with rolled border and erythema around the mouth also. Of course, this is very classical case of staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. We all know that the toxins are responsible for this, and well, the toxin is exfoliative toxin and you get the blistering and desquamation. But one of the important clinical clue we often teach, like, okay, there will be fissuring around the mouth. In fact, it was like the time when I saw a newborn with the lesion, which is on the left side, and the another one child just to represent the fissuring. What happens is actually in staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, oral mucosa is not involved. But how is that you get the fissuring there around the mouth? However, involvement of the keratinized external lip with crusting and fissuring is frequently encountered. That is why you get the fissuring, an important clinical clue for the staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. We know the management very well. How do you treat it? But in any patient with staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, it is important that antibiotic chosen or should cover methicillin resistant Staph aureus until cultures and sensitivities show otherwise. And we also know that we know the different clinical features, which I'm not going to repeat again. Mucosal lesions do not occur because the desmoglein 3 is compensatory in the mucosa and not targeted by the exfoliative toxins, and sepsis is rare in children. And you know the treatment also, but still to repeat again, if clindamycin is initiated in order to decrease toxin production, a penicillinase resistant penicillin or cephalosporin should be used to provide double coverage until susceptibilities can be established. So this way also we can treat it. So what are the clinical pearls out of this case scenario is, one is skin tenderness is an important point in favor of staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. Mucosal lesions do not occur, we know the reason. And because it is due to bacteria, the exfoliative toxin, the blisters will be sterile and sepsis is rare in children. In any patient with staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, it is important that the antibiotic chosen should cover the MRSI until the sensitivity tests are found. And then coming to the another case scenario where you can learn some more clinical clues and pearls is a child with fever, irritability, and skin lesions mainly over the lower extremities. The skin lesions are self-explanatory there. There is reticulate erythema, geographic areas of necrosis, almost ecchymosis, and also some purpuric lesions over the sole also. We know this, we always will have questions like what is a diagnosis, what is a clinical clue, what is a pathogenesis, and how do you approach? Yes, the diagnosis is meningococcemia with porphyria fulminans, but what made us to think that is a clinical clue? You see both the pictures actually, the underlying meningococcemia should be suspected if the skin lesions that start as multiple petechiae with central dusky areas of necrosis. I have made a round or a picture here with multiple lesions. The pointer which I am showing shows the central dusky areas of necrosis. Multiple necrotic lesions are there. This is due to the local Schwarzman reaction. Hence, this is an important clue. And then the articles and the studies also show that the presence, the type and location of the skin lesions in the meningococcal infection can be used as the immediate indicators of prognosis also. How do you make out? That is a clinical clue, which are the indicators for the prognosis. Patients with no skin lesions or those with generalized macular or petechial lesions had a greater incidence of associated meningitis, but less fulminant infection. That means the shock, coagulation factor deficiencies or DICs were rare in those patients. Mortality was very low, that means only 3%. Whereas patients with peripheral purpuric and ecchymotic skin lesions had a high incidence of fulminant infection with little or no meningeal involvement. So there are almost 44% mortality with shock, DIC, or both can be present. So the clue here is like the type of the lesion and where they're located also makes sense in predicting the prognosis in meningococcemia. You know the management, antibiotics, heparin, and fresh frozen plasma. This is just to complete the academic interest of that chapter, condition actually. And then one more point which we should know, actually pediatricians will know better. The antibiotics, whenever there is an acute meningococcal infection, it should include penicillin G, chloramphenicol in patients who are allergic to penicillin and some cephalosporins. Whereas there is also chemoprophylaxis to the people surrounding them. Rifampicin and ciprofloxacin are commonly used, or for to prevention of meningococcemia. And then research for settings, a single intramuscular dose of an oily suspension of chloramphenicol has been shown to be effective as a 5 days penicillin in persons with meningococcal meningitis. Anyway, this is just for a knowledge only how antibiotics are used in meningococcemia. Another case scenario by which we'll learn some more clinical clues and the pearls is a child with sudden onset of moderate to high grade fever, malaise, deep muscle pain and headache is an important thing, and conjunctival suffusion, which you can see in the picture, and the maculopapular rash. And another situation of the same condition, you can get infant with fever and purpuric rash and face swelling also. And in another situation of the same condition, you can get the external ear or the tip of the digits, or even the scrotal tip of the nose. Those can also be involved with necrotic lesions like this. Well, you are dealing with Indian tick typhus. So the rash is considered as a hallmark of all the rickettsial disease, but it is neither seen at presentation nor in all patients. This is very important. The presence of rash is common in spotted fever and extremely rare in scrub typhus. Only you get the in scrub typhus at location you can get the eschar actually. And these rash becomes apparent after 3 to 5 days of onset of symptoms. Initially, rash is in the form of pink, blanching, discrete macules, which subsequently become maculopapular, petechial, or hemorrhagic. These are the various sequence of event in the rickettsial disease or in the Indian typhus. The patient may eventually develop hypotension, thrombocytopenia, acute renal failure, hypotensive shock, or acute respiratory failure. But what is important from our point of view is what is the clinical clue? Actually, the petechiae develops within the macules or papules due to severe vascular injury. Here, I have shown you a picture where the child started with maculopapular rash. And if you see closely in a patient where there is a petechiae development all over the lesions wherever the macules were there. And if you see one more closer look of a lesion which I have made it a mark, there is a petechiae developed within the macules or papule. Also, due to severe vascular injury, there is even necrotic point also. And another thing which is obviously seen in all these rickettsial disease is, I have put a representative figure there, very much obvious. The lesions should look like firm necrotic lesions actually. And this is what is seen in rickettsial disease, Indian tick typhus, where you get this fern leaf-like necrosis. You can also see the focal occlusive end angiitis actually around the external ear, tip of the nose, tip of the scrotum, and also focal occlusive end angiitis going in for peripheral digit gangrene also. So what are the clinical clues you learned from this case scenario is, one is petechiae developed within the macules or papules due to severe vascular injury, and there will be fern leaf-like necrosis, and you can also see the focal end angiitis manifestations which are obvious in the tip of the digits or the nose also. And then always we do a field Felix test, just added for interpretation, either a four-fold rise in agglutinin titer in the paired sera or a single titer of more than equal to 1 in 320 is considered diagnostic for infection with these febrile agents. And then titer of 1 in 80 is to be considered possible infection. This is just to add to the knowledge. Of course, nowadays the other tests are also being done. And then one of the important things which you should always remember is treatment. Administration of doxycycline should not be delayed for the diagnostic confirmation. If you have got all those clinical clues, just start it. Probably you are saving the patient. Then another case scenario by which we will be learning some more clinical clues is, in fact, this was a child which I used to see for infection. First time came, I just gave some treatment, antibiotic. Again came another after 1 month. After 1 month, again the child came. Every time somehow I used to take some pictures also. The child had the multiple pyoderma, but interestingly, I thought, okay, I may be missing something. Then I saw the child has coarse faces, broad nose, and frontal bossing, which had not observed in first case. I thought, okay, it is pyoderma, will treat it. And then multiple pyodermas are where in the various stages of evolution. You can see folliculitis, defolliculitis, then the complete abscess, and also check for hyperextensibility of the joint. So you had a child with multiple time of pyoderma in various stages, coarse faces, cold abscess, and hyperextensible joint. Well, we are dealing with autosomal dominant hyper IgE syndrome. IgE was more than 1,000 actually. And the question was, is it just an infection? Yes, you should be suspicious if you have an infection that is severe, require hospitalization or intravenous antibiotics if it is persistent. In this case, where I kept on giving antibiotic, but he used to keep coming for the same reason. And unusual organism, recurrent and runs in family. Of course, it was autosomal dominant. The father gave an history of a similar thing in one more sibling also actually, not in parents. And well, the clinical pearl out of this case scenario is a diagnosis of primary immunodeficiency should be suspected in both children and adults who have recurrent pneumonias and or ear in sinuses, but more important as a dermatologist, the cutaneous infection. PID should be suspected in patients with recurrent sinus or ear infection or pneumonia within a year, 1 year period, failure to thrive, poor response to prolonged use of antibiotic, persistent thrush or skin abscesses, or a family history of PID. Anyway, the clue here was a recurrent infection, cutaneous infection. So I'm coming to the end of my talk where everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a clinical pearl in dermatology. I would like to quote one of my, I can name Dr. Dinesh Oswal used to say, okay, whenever you find the acral necrolytic erythema, sir, I do the thyroid level. It used to be associated with hypothyroid. That was his observation. Somebody did a study thoroughly and they have presented a paper in JAMA. Yes, now it is being evidence-based. That is the clinical part. So when you see anything, please make sure that some evidence is developed that becomes a clinical pearl in dermatology. I must be thankful to all the office bearers and my all well-wishers for giving me an opportunity to talk on this day, the first talk. Well, I have made an attempt to make sensitization of everything was known to all of you, but these were the clinical clues, these were the clinical pearls, some of them were the therapeutic pearls, which we keep learning every day. Thank you very much. Or to Swapnik.
Okay, I'm speechless. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation and wonderful clues in pediatric dermatology. The session is now open. If there are any questions, please post it in the chat box and sir will answer that. We'll wait for 5 minutes, sir, for any questions to arise.
In the meanwhile, you can also give some glimpses of what is...
So I'll request Mutalik sir to talk about it. Dr. Mutalik sir. Sir. Yeah. Till the questions come, you can comment on the sir's presentation and some clues from your side.
I was spellbound and speechless, same as you. Learned many things again and again from this lucid talk, and as he always says, and that don't just see, observe. And that's how we learn. And step-by-step approach, meticulous approach, and classical algorithm, multiple lesions, one lesion, or the appearance of the crust. Simple things we usually miss on these points, and actually this is an important message not only to the students but also to the practitioners who we come across such cases day in and out. But now I realize that we are overlooking, maybe due to the workload, these points are easily missed out. And I would like to request Nandar sir to mention about this acronym, about the day number, which day the rash appears and which day the fever. Many people may not be knowing. I have put it on my desktop at my clinic. Sir, please.
Okay, we'll have one more session on that. No? We'll probably.
Okay, sir, there is a question, sir. Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
So there is a question. How does purpura fulminans, purpura of meningococcal infection differs from rickettsia? It was asked by Dr. Madke.
Yes, very good question. And yes, the purpura due to meningococemia, usually it is in dependent areas, and gluteal region is the most common area involved. Whereas the rickettsia is almost whole body can involve, and typically the acral regions, like what I was telling, the end angiitis of tip of the nose, tip of the external ear, all those things are involved quite early compared to this the meningococemia. And geographical areas of necrosis is more common in meningococemia. That is the one thing.
Okay, and there's another question. Clues to differentiate between a exanthem, a viral exanthem, and a drug reactions.
I would, I think I will not take this question. Simple reason is let them be restricted to the topic which we have.
Which was been
Probably we'll take one more every month or so. We'll be talking. It becomes just a viva question for me. Sorry for these words.
And what is our approach to the case of purpura fulminans? Like, how do you investigate? How do you, as a therapeutic approach to the?
Irrespective of the cause, we have to find out, like neonatal, that is protein C, protein S deficiency, whether it is post-infectious purpura fulminans, whatever may be the said and done. Once the DIC sets in, I showed you one the slide where first one is antibiotic, and the another is free frozen plasma. Another is heparinization. And in fact, if you want me to show again, I can just recall that and show that slide.
Yes, sir. You can do that.
I didn't discuss much simply because, okay, all of you will be qualified in knowing those things. Instead of repeating, I'll just show you that. That's a good one, actually.
Yes.
Yes. See, the management of, irrespective of the cause, you have to have the mainstay of treatment. If it is due to post-infectious, that is broad spectrum antibiotic, correction of the hypovolemia and electrolyte imbalance. The other would be the heparinization. There are two things. If it is only DIC, idiopathic purpura fulminans, well, you have to give low dose heparin infusion of 10 units per kg per hour. And if it is post-infectious purpura fulminans, you have to use a IV bolus of 100 units per kg, followed by continuous infusion of 25 units per kg per hour. And then the another thing easily can be done in many of these centers is institutions is fresh frozen plasma. What is the dose? 8 to 12 ml per kg, 12th hourly is given to reduce the risk of hemorrhage and to restore the deficient coagulation factors like protein C, protein S, and antithrombin 3. In fact, easiest way is first give the fresh Enplasmoma and good antibiotic coverage, and heparinization has to be done if there is imminent necrosis of the digits or something is seen in any case of purpura fulminans. I think I have made my point clear.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So another question, autosomal dominant hyper IgE syndrome.
Mhm.
Once you diagnose it, what is the management protocol? I mean, do they require a prophylactic antibiotics, or how do you manage these patients?
Actually, it is mentioned that prophylactic antibiotic can be given, especially the good one is actually cotrimoxazole.
Okay.
Or even another way, I mean, actually the penicillin tablets, oral tablets.
Penicillin.
And ultimately, as the overgrows, age, the severity will come down, but is not much. And then if it is really severe, IVIG can be given. Then it becomes like you have to be after that, that's all. I'll stop this sharing and then talk to you. Okay, sorry.
Sir, Raghunath here, sir.
Ah.
Sir, regarding that impetigo and involvement of kidney, PSGN, when you were telling, I was thinking that we might have missed many cases of impetigo, which might have progressed to kidney involvement.
Yeah.
So we see regularly many cases of impetigo. Is there any clue in like number of lesions or particular site of involvement of impetigo which indicates kidney clinically, kidney involvement? Possibility of.
There are two things there. Older the child or post pharyngitis is very common, they say. In preschool children, this impetigo itself, I don't think, I don't have an idea that any particular location will cause. If you know, we can add to it, because they're also.
Yes.
You have anything like that?
No, sir, no.
I don't.
Just I want to.
Message here is very simple.
Yes, sir.
Let's not think, okay, क्या हो गया, impetigo है, थोड़ा छोड़ दो करके. But I think twice daily application of whatever is there, if it is topical, please give it properly. And if there is a slightest evidence that, okay, you need to give antibiotics orally also, please give it, because this trivial infection can lead into something more complicated. Of course, the incidence is low also, but still we have to take care. This is what is my message out of it. We shouldn't neglect, okay, chalo kya hota hai karke. Okay. Yes.
Do we need to follow up with renal examination or urine routine, something?
I haven't read. Maybe this is a good question for me to just check it.
Because if it is rare, I think we can at least have a urine routine examination sequentially.
Something like Henox-Onlin purpura, we follow it every month or so for about 6 months, the urine examination. Yes, it makes sense, probably.
So there is another interesting question from Chandrasekhar, sir.
Yeah.
Can we use omalizumab in hyper IgE syndrome along with antibiotics? Because it's an IgE mediated pathology. So can we use omalizumab?
Using the IVIG and omalizumab also, I think we can use it. Nothing wrong. When Ig elevated, when there is a Ig increase in Ig associated with bullous pemphigoid, those cases we use it and it gives good result.
And when do you add a systemic antibiotics in non-bullous impetigo? Let's say a non-bullous impetigo presents to you, instead of topical antibiotics, when we should add a systemic antibiotic?
Interesting question, actually, I like to answer. One is extensive, little more extensive, probably you have to use it. Another thing is slightest systemic
Symptoms.
like fever. The child says, okay, fever, you have to give. And another thing is, of course, knowledgeable is the regional lymphadenopathy. That means it has gone little more and it is extensive.
So regarding this Staphylococcus aureus skin syndrome, in early, if we could identify the disease very early, can we use oral antibiotics, or it is always mandatory to admit the patient and
Yes, I think if the sites, for example, around the umbilicus or
Yes.
around the mouth, it started, and if you can just check the skin tenderness
Yes.
uh, before developing the Nikolsky sign, like I think you can start oral, especially I use the linozolid actually, a few of them. You can, because it is the toxin which is being, it's not bacteremia as such.
And sir, another question is the biopsy from meningococcal lesion is helpful in diagnosing it? Suppose the other way is to do a culture, but can we do a biopsy, and whether it is going to be helpful for diagnosing meningococcal purpura-fulminans or say meningococcal rash?
I will share that picture. Just 1 minute. I will explain that. Yes, here, light microscopy disclosed a large number of Neisseria meningitidis organism, both in the endothelial cells and being phagocytized by neutrophils. Vascular injury was characterized by means of both light and electron microscopy by endothelial necrosis, thrombosis, and necrosis of the other elements of the vascular wall, such as muscle cells and pericytes. Well, you can do the biopsy. In fact, some more, if somebody is interested, they can refer this Journal of Infectious Diseases way back 1976, actually.
And sir, another interesting question is asked by Dr. Tolad sir. How to differentiate any differentiating point between purpura fulminans versus necrotizing fasciitis, sir? Like early patients of necrotizing fasciitis or purpura fulminans presents to you, is there any differentiating point?
1 minute. Hey, Nikhil, ಇದು ಫೋನ್ ತಗೋ, ಯಾರೋ ಗುರುವರ ಮಾಡಾಕ್ತಿದ್ರು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. Sorry, some phone had come.
Yes, sir. So the question is early purpura fulminans versus early necrotizing fasciitis.
Very good question. Simple. See, necrotizing fasciitis usually develops from the cellulitis, existing cellulitis only. You know the cellulitis, when there is edema, bullous lesions, hemorrhagic lesions, and the out of proportion pain. So it is localized area. I don't think there is anything which will make us to confuse those things. This is my thinking. Sir knows better than me many aspects. He can always add to it.
Yes, sir. And Dr. Samipa wants to ask, in case of recurrent impetigo after ruling out any primary immunodeficiency, should we use decolonization regime?
Yes,
if yes, should we use only for the patient or for family members as well?
I think interesting. There are two issues here. Whenever there is an outbreak of such things in neonates, usually even the nursing staff also apply the mipirocin to the digits and all actually. And even nursing mother should also be advised to clean and apply the mipirocin. The one more thing is, how do you treat that the carrier stays, like mipirocin application. One more, even chlorhexidine wash of the genital area should also be done. In fact, what mipirocin we are using is not a base for nasal use. Calcium alginate is the better. Unfortunately, we don't get in India. Still, we are using, and quite a good result is there.
And Dr. Sukesh wants to ask how to differentiate hyper IG syndrome with severe atopic dermatitis, as both can present with recurrent skin infection, increased IG levels, and increased cytopulmonary infections.
Interesting. Invariably, the impetiginization which we see, that is called secondary pyoderma, especially in a case of atopic dermatitis, the lesions will be over the existing lesions initially. So you get the golden yellow crusted lesions over the existing the atopic dermatitis patients. So that way you can differentiate. I don't think individually there will be increased.
And the typical facies, what you described of
other features like facies, frontal bossing, hyperextension of the joint sometime, like that. You have to be. Clinical tools have to be added and then made some diagnosis.
Yes, sir. And Anga ma'am I want to ask, do you recommend nasal swab for carrier status in recurrent impetigo?
That can be done, but clinically, if you think it is more than like repeated occurrence is there, better to go directly. Why you want to do it again?
Okay. I think there's no more questions. Dr. Raghu sir, you want to ask something?
He can interact, add, he knows better than.
No, sir.
Yes, sir, please,
I
sir.
wanted, because it is about clinical clues and pulse. We have seen most of the diseases you have discussed have got a serious systemic involvement is there. How with simple clinical examination and interpreting those signs and symptoms, we can really diagnose them very early, and we can prevent most of the time. And we have, I think everybody has got this experience of usually pediatricians or surgeon, physicians, usually they call for reference. We could able to diagnose just with the clinical lesions if we know the clinical clues and pearls, and we can simplify the treatment, especially for rickettsia. Usually they admit in ICU thinking that it is DIC, because that purpura pulmonis like lesions, and with simple doxycycline we can treat the disease if we can diagnose it properly. That is the whole thing about this clinical clues and pearls.
There's another question. In atopic erythroderma, should we also always take a baseline squeeze swab if there is no signs of secondary infection, as we are starting the patient on systemic immunosuppressives? Like severe atopic dermatitis, should we always include a skin swab?
No. As an erythroderma, it can, not as an atopic dermatitis in detail. Because erythroderma, you never know what you want to wish to take. Yes.
And sir, secondly, of all these conditions, wherever you like to admit the patient and start with IV antibiotics, and where the oral antibiotics are sufficient?
No, I think the staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, meningococcemia, all those things need the admission, and in fact, sometime infants, we just make at least pediatrician should be kept in loop. There is nothing wrong in sharing those things. Sometimes we may not be able to address some of the systemic manifestations, which we may overlook. Those things has to be kept. The disease is nobody's land. It is everybody's land. We have to. We should never compartmentalize ourselves.
I think we are through with the questions. How long the decolonization therapy be given, sir?
Ideally, what book says is 5 days in a month for 3 consecutive months has to be done.
That's intranasal.
Okay, mipiracin story. If it fails, okay, there is one more. For adults also, rifampicin is for 10 days also they use. The one more, if you still want to use something else like clindamycin is also being advocated. But many a times what I have found out, in children, this mipiracin would be sufficient. In adults, I have found, okay, we have to use the rifampicin if and extreme cases, I have used repeated Bocard simpetigo, all those to happen, and then clindamycin was the savior for my cases. But there you have to remember the pseudomembranous colitis and other things. Theoretically also and practically can happen, and you should have to save the drugs as much as possible, use the best available ones.
Right, sir. Another interesting question is normal saline compresses versus diluted potassium permanganate compresses in cutaneous infections.
Well, in fact, I would always suggest extensive impetigo. You have to do potassium permanganate. The compresses would be a better one. Maybe the protein dissolving of the protein material is more with the potassium permanganate. And the nidus, though the most superficial part of the skin is involved, the material will be there. In fact, the compresses would help, and then the mipiracin also will help, like that. It's a combination effect. If it just the lesion is there and keep on applying meprisone over that, probably it will take more time. If you just do compresses within 3 days, you get the best result.
Okay, sir. Apart from Indian tick typhus, which we have presented, what are the other rickettsial infections we see in pediatrics which manifest in with skin?
Like scrub typhus, actually only one eschar can be there. There are very rarely multiple eschars can be seen. So that you have to keep it in mind.
And what about the Rocky Mountain spotted fever, sir? Like we see some cases of spotted fever.
Because whatever we have seen, and in fact, in one of the the microbiology department did the cultural study and sent them to CDC also. That is rickettsia, the Kunori, which is for Indian tick typhus.
Tick typhus.
That's why I was able to boldly tell diagnosis. Otherwise, I would have told just rickettsia infection.
Yes. There are a lot of questions about eczema herpeticum, sir. Would you like to take it, or it will be in the next webinar?
Next. In fact, I limited to
Bacterial infections.
Talk something more. The next scenario definitely will keep doing it.
I think we are at the end of the session. Thank you for, sir. What is the dose of rifampicin for decolonization, if at all want to be used in pediatric patients?
I think we have to go by the dose per milligram per kg body weight. In adults, we use 600 milligram daily for 10 days. I think you have to reduce 450 weight about 35.
About the weight.
That science has to be used. These dose, I'm just as a friendly reminder to all my friends who are all knowledgeable. We should see that. That's all. Not with any other else. I'm just telling you.
Right, sir.
Okay, Dr.
I think I'll ask Dr. Mutalik sir to comment on it and then close the session on the behalf of PDF. Dr. Mutalik sir, please.
Yes. I will be in a better position if I show my presentation, because after listening to such a highly academic talk, it will be difficult for me to speak. Is the screen visible?
Not, yes, it started screen sharing, but we're not seeing the screen. Yeah, it's visible now.
Yes.
So everybody must be before this meeting thinking that what is this pediatric dermatology forum? Not only thinking, but having a look at it, what it would be, and curious like this child. And funnily, sir has asked to talk about words of wisdom. That is the greatest joke today, because I cannot talk about wisdom when he has talked so much about. At the most, I can take pictures and put in my talk. So my knowledge about pediatric dermatology is in infancy, or like a child, or the kid of Charlie Chaplin, just having a curiosity and observing what sir is teaching. Because the main person, the person behind this forum, the visionary is none other than Nanda sir. So he's a staunch believer of Bhagavad Gita, Karmanya Vadikaraste Ma Phaleshu Kadachan. Come what may, I will go on teaching and sharing. And being pediatric dermatology, Balakrishna. So this is the brainchild, his inspiration, William Osler. Medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability. His passion, taking the care of tender skin, that is pediatric dermatology. His goal is reaching the unreached. Never say never again. And his motto, keep on walking, and searching for new horizons. चल रहा था यूं ही अकेला जानिबे मंजिले मगर, लोग मिलते गए, कारवां बंधा गया. So the journey has started. His focus and aim, as he rightly said, be a Sherlock Holmes and aim at the diagnosis. And second motto is teaching to learn together. This is how I am there, trying to learn his master's voice. So well begun is half done. The one of Pediatric Dermatology Forum has golden colors, many milestones to be accomplished and achieved in this journey. But हमें पूरा है विश्वास, PDF will certainly achieve more heights with your help. Thank you very much, sir. ज्योत से ज्योत जलाते चलो, ज्ञान की गंगा बहाते चलो. Thank you for asking us, and this is an pleasure to be part of this journey. Let us keep learning and hearing from all the gurus on this platform, and I can see me experts on this in this audience, and I request them to participate in the future meetings. Thank you very much.
So, right, sir. So, thank you once again for all the participants, and we will meet you soon again, probably in after 2 months with another one of its kind meeting. Thank you very much. So, should we close the meeting now, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.